Masipotise mawethu, thanks for joining us. Sesifikile ke thina nenkqubo Yilungelo Lakho ejongene namalungelo enu njengabathengi. Simphathela yona ke ku-SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Igama lam kaloku nguSisanda Jonas. Njengesikhuluma wethu kuhambeni kwexesha siza kunivulela iminxeba ukuba nani nithabathe inxaxheba. Inombolo zethu apha e-studio zithi 011 714 6918 okanye ku-011 714 6919. Ningasithumelela ke ne-email ku-consumer@sabc.co.za kanti ningasifumana ke nakwindlela zonxibelelwano zala maxesha uFacebook okanye kuTwitter. Ukuthenga indlu yinto ezisa imincili kubathengi, ingakumbi abo bathenga izindlu okokuqala ebomini babo. Kodwa kwamanye amaxesha loo mincili ijika ibe kukuzikhanda ngenyika elityeni ngenxa yempazamo nezinto esingaziqaphelanga phambi kokuba sizibophelele. Yes, many consumers buying properties, especially first-time homeowners, often do not know half of what awaits them afterwards. And it is the ignorance of all that is involved that can turn your dream into a nightmare. On today's show, we place focus on all that you need to know before buying a home. Well, to help us discuss the pitfalls and steps that you need to take before making or buying a home, let's extend a warm welcome to our studio guests. We are pleased to be joined by Pierre Venter from the Banking Association. Samukele No-Jimmy Baloyi, Yena ke Ovela Kwi-Estate Agency Affairs Board. Sibenaye ke Levy, Yena Oligqwetha Elivela kwa Levy Attorneys. Gentlemen, welcome to the program and thank you very much for joining us. Let me start off with you, Alan. Just to take us through whether the market is ripe for home buyers at the moment. And one of the concerns that have been raised by observers or experts in your field is that even if the market is ripe, home buyers may not be ready. What are your thoughts on that?
All right, Sisanda, that's a very good question you've raised. At the moment, what's actually happening is the banks, as far as I'm aware, are more keen to lend money at the moment. As soon as the banks are more keen to lend money, what happens is you have more buyers in the market. As soon as you have more buyers in the market, you automatically have more sellers in the market, because sellers can now better get the price they want, because instead of there being 2 buyers, there's now 10 buyers. So I would say that the property market at the moment, there's really a little bit of a flow in the system, and things are starting to take off.
All right. What are the common mistakes that home buyers make, before they buy these houses? Siyafuna ukwazi bana abantu benza impazamo ezinjani na phambi kokuba bathenge ezi zindlu, especially first-time home buyers.
Yeah. Sisanda, thank you very much for that question. The challenge that we're facing is buying property, buying a house is probably the most important investment anyone would ever make in their life. Now, out of excitement, there are simple things that people overlook. For instance, you'd find that the property itself, that there are so many problems relating to that property, and out of excitement, people forget to take that into consideration. And most importantly, you'll realize that obviously the role player, the most important role player in the market is an estate agent. What I want to say to first-time property buyers is that, especially where they're dealing with estate agents, firstly, they need to make sure that this estate agent is duly registered and have a Fidelity Fund certificate from the Estate Agency Affairs Board. And they have to make sure this person has a mandate, has been duly mandated by the seller to sell that property. Before
we carry on that point exactly, because we are going to dissect this issue, I want to ask Mr. Venter here in terms of what you have identified in terms of the common mistakes that home buyers make.
Thank you, Sisanda. I think that probably for me the most important aspect is that when a consumer is going to buy a home for the first time, they go in making an informed choice. Which means that before they go out to buy the property, they research as much as they possibly can as to what they need to look for in a property, what potential pitfalls there are, what they should be looking for when they go out and view that property. And Jimmy touched on it a minute ago, making sure that you deal with a registered estate agent. But outside of that, I think for me, what is absolutely key is truthfulness and affordability. Alan spoke a minute ago about our property market being in a reasonable space at this point in time. I would just caution consumers, especially first-time home buyers, not to overcommit themselves in this climate today. If I look at our interest rates, they're probably the lowest real interest rates in 35 years. And because people buy property on a variable or floating interest rate, as the prime overdraft interest rate goes up, so too do their bond repayments and all other debt repayments that they have. And one needs to therefore make sure that you can afford the property and that you make an informed choice around where you want to buy. Why do you want to buy in that area? Is it convenient for work? Is it convenient for kids' schooling and so on? So that's all part of the equation and the research that you do before you actually go into the market.
I suppose you need not be too emotional about this decision before you enter into because it's a big one. I mean, looking at affordability, if you were to break this down, what exactly should you be looking into in terms of what you want to buy?
I think you need to sit down very honestly and work out your budget. Outside of working out your budget, when you buy a property, you're not just buying the property itself, you're also buying the maintenance of that property with it. So you need to factor that into consideration. And one of the things that I always suggest to consumers is that they should stress test themselves that if interest rates go up by, say, 2%, that they will still be able to afford their overall debt, not just their home. And then the other big mistake that first-time home buyers very often make is that when they do buy a property, they are moving into their new mansion, and your new mansion has to be kitted out with furniture and curtains and everything else, and they then go and commit themselves to further debt, thus creating unaffordable position for themselves.
Ellen, if you're looking at affordability, I suppose reducing your debt before you buy a house is very important, because if you have debts, this could, the debts, I mean, this could affect your credit.
That's correct,
yes, because I mean, you need approval for this house, but now you need a clean credit.
Yes, that's true. I think Pierre and Jimmy have both raised very important points. Pierre touched on the affordability issue, and Jimmy touched on verifying the agent you're dealing with. Both of these issues are dealt with by the potential buyer before you've even signed the offer to purchase. So we haven't yet come to the buying of the house, and you've got to look at the affordability, and you've got to look at verifying the agent. That's important. When you try and establish whether you can afford it, you've obviously, as Pierre touched on, got to assess your situation, the space you're in, your income, your other expenses, and you've got to provide for interest rates also going up in time to come. What you don't want is a scenario where you cannot afford to pay your bond to the bank, where you cannot afford to pay your other creditors, your fashion accounts, your phone account. What will then happen is you will have your creditors taking legal action against you. You will have letters of demand coming. You will have summonses coming. And then you will have judgments granted against you.
And you could lose this house.
As soon as that happens, those judgments get listed on the Credit Bureau's records nationally. All your creditors have access to that information. Whenever you apply for credits in the future, they look at that information. And yes, Sisanda, you're correct. Eventually, you can lose your house, you can lose your car, and you can be put in a severe financial predicament.
So what are we saying now? If you see that you're in a situation where you can't afford, should you wait, keep renting, or look for something that you can afford?
I think it depends at what stage of your lifestyle you're in, whether you're ready for home ownership, because home ownership carries with it a lot of responsibility and accountability. And if you're ready to make that move into home ownership, make it an informed one, but then do it within your budget limitations. And I think one very often, and you touched on it a minute ago, Sisanda, that it's not an emotional decision that you make. People are obviously very excited, they're looking to buy their first home, but you need to actually make that decision with your head, and is that property the right property for you? And if it's not the right property, rather continue looking until you do find the right property, because it is such a big and important investment.
Jimmy, sizame ukutacha kwizinto ezibalulekileyo. Another one that you had raised was that you verify the agent. How do I do that? How do I go about doing that?
Look, it's very simple. Swi easy kuba munhu tihlanganisa na the Estate Agency Affairs Board. You simply pick up your phone, call the Estate Agency Affairs Board, and they will tell you if that person is a duly registered estate agent and whether that person is duly licensed to sell property. It's as easy as that.
But it's important.
It's very, very important.
Yes. But another problem that has come out, I'll come to you, Pierre, is that experts are basically saying that the most probable of the problems that one might come across is the issue concerning mortgages. Why would there be a problem with this?
Are you referring
Mortgages.
to the eligibility of
Yes,
people to
yes,
afford a mortgage or to get a mortgage from a bank?
Yes.
I think one needs to take into consideration the fact that when a bank lends money, it's actually lending deposited money. It's your and my salary that they're actually on lending. So they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that they lend prudently and that they take due care that when they grant you a loan that you'll be able to repay that loan. What we are finding today with a lot of consumers is that they're over-indebted, and Alan touched on it a minute ago. We have, in our country at the moment, 1 out of 2 consumers is over-indebted. We have 46% of our consumers with adverse credit track records where they haven't been able to repay their debt. And immediately that you pick up that profile as a lender, you will not grant a mortgage loan to that person until they actually do fix their credit track record and they improve their affordability. I think that's the one issue. I think the second issue is the days where people got 100% bond plus costs and they put no money in as a deposit when they bought a property are gone. I think the global crisis, which started in America, has created a more prudent and more conservative lending policy as far as the banks is concerned, and there are international governance frameworks called the Basel III framework, which actually promotes that conservative lending, that the world will not go back into what created our global crisis again. And part of that is that very often your mortgagee will look for a deposit from the consumer. So you need to actually start saving before you actually just go into the market to
and what's the percentage there?
It can vary from lender to lender. Some of the banks at the moment are back up at 100%. Others are asking for 90, are prepared to grant 90% loans. That's a competitive matter.
All right.
But I think start off by savings, making sure your finances are in place and your credit track record is right, and you shouldn't have a problem.
All right, let's continue with our discussion. But before we do that, let me remind you that you can also take part in the show by calling us on 011-714-6918 or 011-714-6919. You can also email us with thoughts to your consumer at sabc.co.za or catch us on Facebook or Twitter. Please join us after this. Welcome back. You're still on Yilungelo Lakho. It's your right. We are still discussing all you need to know before buying a home and potential pitfalls consumers often fall into. And we'll also look at your right to legal recourse. And our participation line is 011-714-6918 or 011-714-6919, or email us your comments to consumer@sabc.co.za. Alternatively, find us on Facebook or Twitter. Phambi kokuba siqhubeke sinayo uThando emnxebeni. Thando, wamkelekile enkqubeni?
Yebo, uThando lo.
Ewe Thando, wamkelekile?
Yes, umyeni wathenga umuzi la kwaMashu. Umewuthenga washo ukuthi ubaba lo sathenga kuyena isikhathi samafoni wathi akashadile, so umama lo ayishade naye sedivorcile azange ayithola imali. Nje engayitholanga imali nje usahleli lo muzi manje asikwazi ukungena endlini mase abambe nabo bethi sineke kulo mama bazokwenza izinto kodwa manje futhi abenze kusalokho ehlele endlini.
Indlu kabani lena Thando?
Umyeni wami wayithenga indlu.
Okay, ngokukho umuntu ophakathi koyo ongakwazi ongafuna uphuma.
Yes, ngiya ukuthi lo baba esathenga kuyena wathi akashadile futhi igcwalisa ifomu le bekudayisa indlu wathi akaze ashade.
All right. Thank you very much, Tando, for your question. Tando is from KZN, and a problem is that her husband bought a house, but now the tenant there does not want to move because the seller of the house is not married. I don't know how those link, but I mean, I think it's just an excuse not to move out of the house. Maybe Jimmy ukumphendula.
Look, as I've already pointed out, it really doesn't make sense to me, because marriage and selling the property, unless it's a situation whereby the parties were married in community of property and one of the parties doesn't want to sign, in which case it might, interfere with the process itself.
All right. It sounds like maybe then it's two people. One sold the house, but the other one was not in agreement with this. So the one who's in the house does not want to move out. What happens in this situation, Ellen?
See, Sanda, the point that's being made is that the house has been sold. Presumably the person who had the right to sell the property has signed the documentation, and the property has now been transferred to the purchaser. It doesn't matter if one of the other people who live in the house now say they're not prepared to leave or they're not married to the other seller. The point is that the person who could legally sell it has sold it, and the buyer has taken transfer. The buyer can now demand that anyone occupying his house, which he now owns, must leave the house immediately. And if they don't, the buyer can seek legal recourse to get the occupiers evicted from the property.
All right. We do have uVyokazi, and uphume Pretoria. Vyokazi, wamkelekile nkubeni?
Yebo, unjani?
Ndiyaphila, makunjani?
Siyakhona. Nginombuzo engicela ukubuza kule topic yanamhlanje.
Ungabuza ke mama.
Umyeni wami sathenga indlu ye-loan ngo-97.
Mama, ndiyakuva.
And then nje masithenge indlu ngo-97. Ayiwelanga under ibhanka, yawela ilantikana esibhadala imali e-agency, and then basibuza ukuthi kutheni into bangazange basixhumanise nebhanki, ungazi so siwele trapping ngoku bathi indlu ama-areas akhona enza uma-11,000, but umyeni wami uyatry ukuthi ayibhadale imali yakhona, but asiyazi le mali ithathwa emyenini wami because imali ideductwa ku-payslip emsebenzini iya kwi-agent, mara right through bayafonela bathi indlu kuma-area uye ebhankini akho nto yenzekayo.
Alright, inkosi kakhulu ke mama, ngicela nje ubukele kumabonakude wakho, sizawuzama ukuphendula. Jimmy, ndizawucela uzame ukunceda umama.
Yeah, okay. She's basically saying, please correct me if I didn't hear properly. She's saying that the husband bought a house and the amount towards the bond amount is being deducted on a monthly basis from,
and it's being paid to an agent, not the bank.
Over to the agent. Look, obviously we don't have the full facts, but if this could mean that this particular estate agent is the one who sold the house, and maybe they reached some kind of agreement that the husband will pay the estate agent, because if there's a bond involved, payment should go straight to the bank and not to the estate agent.
Is this something that's common, Pierre?
No, it's the first I've heard of this where a bond has been paid and the agent has been paid. It doesn't make sense to me.
So how should they handle this situation? What should they do now? She says the house is in arrears now.
Yeah. Look, if it's in arrears...
Sorry, hold on a second, Jimmy. What she's indicating, I think what she may be indicating to you is that she's paying her monthly repayment, but it's not going through to the bank, and the estate agent is taking the money, and therefore it's got into arrears. Is that not what she's suggesting?
It sounds like it could be the problem, but that's not that's not how they understand the situation. So again, what should they do now?
Look, I think that the first thing for them to do would be to verify who the bondholder is. If it is the bank, they must approach the bank and make arrangements in regard to that. But at the same time, that they should, I think, get their facts straight in as far as the agent is involved. Because if the agent is involved and the agent is taking the money, that really, because normally what happens is if where there's a bond, obviously the bank will either put a debit order or a stop order from the employer side. So we shouldn't be sitting with this problem. But now when she says that they are in arrears. I don't know whether it's in arrears in as far as the agent is concerned or the bank is concerned.
But what Pierre is saying could be the reason, because I mean,
assuming,
if they are paying every
Yeah,
month, because
yeah.
that's what she's saying, if
Yes.
they're paying every month, then why would the house be in
I would
arrears?
suggest the very first thing she should do is go in and talk to a bank and find out exactly what the position is and take her documentary proof that she's got that she's actually been making payments to them. Let them go through the whole process with her so that she understands what is actually happening. You know, very often what you find is that when consumers start getting into arrears, they don't do anything about it. And I would urge any consumer that the moment they're in financial trouble or they even heading in that direction, go and talk to your bank.
Isivezela indaba yokubana kubalekile for you to verify the agent.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an example that we
Yes.
got now. Ellen, let me come to you, and we looked at affordability, we look at verifying the agent. What's the next step now in this process?
All right, so once you've made sure that you can afford the property, you've verified which agent you're dealing with, you may or may not have met the seller. I suppose the next thing would be, if you decide you can afford the property, is to actually put in an offer for the property. When that happens, normally the estate agent would come to you, the buyer, first, and he would complete a document normally between 4 to 6 pages long, which would detail your offer that you're making for the property.
All right, so you'll tell us about the terms now
Indeed,
in
I
that
will.
offer to purchase. For now, let's take another break. Hlala kunye nathi ke Mbukeli. Welcome back, and we continue with our discussion. Sinaye ke uMishek from Vereeniging. Mishek, wamkelekile enkqubeni?
Sisam kunjani?
Yaphila tata, kunjani?
Sikhona. Well, firstly, let me thank. Hello?
Hello tata, ndiyakuva, thetha.
That's right. Let me thank Yilungelo Lakho. I was here before in a program that was there with a government employee pension fund.
All right, yes.
I was here. Thank you so much for that. But my second issue, I would like you to direct it to the gentleman from the women's settlement, the banking sector, part of it.
All right.
With opinion that I was recklessly being lended the money by a certain bank, which I don't want to reveal its name. I've got a proof in relation to my payslip starting from 2007 to date. I need to check before I could approach the bank to say my opinion, to say that, because now right now I can't afford, really fully speaking, I cannot afford, and there is too much burden on my shoulder. Now I don't want to approach the bank without me having facts correctly. I need to just to get an advice from the gentleman to say that, can I see them, or do I have a winnable case in relation to the matter that I've spoken to?
Well, ngicela usibambele nje kancinci tata. Pierre, is there any question you have for him, or you are fine with his question?
I'm not quite understanding what he's asking. What I'm hearing is that he's he's got an affordability problem at the moment.
All right, Tata, Michelle, can you hear Pierre? All right, he's not there. Michelle, you're not there. Are you still there? Okay, Michelle is not there. All right, let's talk about it. Maybe try to answer according to what you understood about his question.
Okay. My understanding is that he has an affordability problem at the moment, and he's battling financially. And he's scared to actually go to his bank. And he's saying, well, is there something else that I can actually do? You know, I think probably the most important thing is for him to sit down honestly and work out his financial position. And if he still has a problem, and you can cut out luxuries, unnecessary expenditure, but if he still has a problem, that he can actually sit down with a debt counsellor, and they are put in place through the National Credit Act, where you can actually go and seek guidance from them. However, I would still urge him, there is always a cost attached to getting somebody like that involved to help you with your financial position. I would go into to the bank and sit down with them very honestly and tell them that I have a problem. One of the things that people do very often is they don't recognize that when they were sitting on a valuable asset, and he bought it, and I understood from his commentary that he bought it back in 2007, and he may have substantive equity in that property, and he could sell that property, make a profit, pay off his debt, get himself financially fit again, and start over again.
Because he is saying that he can't afford. I mean, he's being honest about that. I don't know if you have any thoughts about
a bank hates foreclosing on a property, and if you go in and see them, they will try. What a banker will do is he'll try and look to see how they can work through this together, that you don't lose the property. And if you can't see your way through, your best bet is to actually sell that property and then start
So his first step, he must go to the bank.
If you leave it alone, all that will happen is that legal process that Ellen spoke about earlier in our conversation will end up being followed by a bank to try and get its deposited money back.
All right, thank you. Ellen?
Yes, I agree with Pierre. The National Credit Act started some 5 or 6 years ago, and any consumer who finds himself under pressure from creditors, any consumer who can't afford to pay his debts, can seek the redress in terms of that act and can go and see a debt counsellor and go under debt review, where the debt is taken and monthly payments are made to all the creditors. It's like a manager appointed over your affairs with more experience than you that can help you manage your debts. The other options that a consumer would have is sequestration as a last resort. No one really wants to be sequestrated, but as a last resort, that is also an option for a consumer. And there's also a term called being placed under administration, which is similar to debt review, but something different. If a consumer does elect to go under any of these three options, what is the most important item for the consumer to do is to investigate each properly, to find out what powers he's going to lose and what the costs are going to be that these third parties who are going to manage his affairs will be charging.
All right.
But I did understand Mishak's question actually to be touching on another issue. I think he did refer to, in his case, he alleged that the bank back in 2007 had recklessly forwarded him finance. And I think his question to Pierre was, what remedies does he now have against the bank for recklessly lending the money and mortgaging the house 6 years ago? Maybe Pierre can touch on that.
Maybe touch on that quickly.
Surely. You have a national credit regulator, and you can actually make application through them if you believe that credit has been advanced to you on a reckless basis. I would, however, suggest that he sit down with his bank again, raise it as an issue, and if he doesn't get a satisfactory answer from his bank, take the matter to the banking ombudsman, who will actually assist him and make a ruling on that particular matter. If he doesn't like the response, he can obviously take the matter to the courts. But he can approach the National Credit Regulator's office and make that allegation of reckless lending. Now, obviously, the National Credit Act, which came in 2007, the loan would have to have been post the inception of that act for him to have recourse against the lender. In terms of the National Credit Act, if a lender makes a reckless lending, that debt can actually be written off.
I mean, obviously, credit providers are basically required to assess a person's situation before they can lend money. But Ellen, I wanted to look at, before we went to the break, we were looking at the terms of the offer to purchase, and it's an important factor. So break that down to us. I know you're saying that it's 6 pages long, but try to explain that to us in a few minutes.
It's really a topic that one can talk for 1 hour about. As a consumer, you're going to be presented with an offer between 4 to 8 pages normally, often in a small font, packed with information and in a language sometimes you don't quite understand, a type of legalese. In terms of the Consumer Protection Act, the offer to purchase must be in layman's language, since the Act started some 2 years ago. Perhaps a good idea would be to ask the estate agent for a working copy of the offer. Often you'll see that the offer can be divided into 3 parts. The first part would be the parties' names. That's quite simple. The first part also contains the price you're paying for the property. That's also quite simple. The first part also contains the address of the property you're buying, also quite simple. That can be put aside and not too much attention paid to it, say for ensuring that it's accurate.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The last part of the offer is often the general clauses, which normally protect often the estate agent first, because he's the one who's prepared the offer. Next, it would protect the seller, because that's the estate agent's client. And last, the consumer, which is you who's buying the property. Those clauses at the end are normally also legalese clauses. They must be read, but they're not strictly pertinent to the crux of the offer to purchase, which is the middle part, part 2. In part 2, you've often got 3 sections. Section 1 is occupation of the property, when you're going to occupy the property. Often that's on transfer. When the conveyancers put the property into your name, then you will occupy it. But it can be made the day you sign the offer to purchase, or it can be made months after you take transfer. That's called the occupation clause.
Okay.
You've then got a breach clause. The breach clause describes what happens if you, the buyer, or the seller don't comply with the offer to purchase. Also a very important clause to read.
All right. Ndifuna uza kuwe Jimmy about these terms. Wena uzamile usichazela ukubana obviously i-language esetyenziswayo apha ayizoba lula for wonke umuntu. Nina ke ngoku as mhlawumbi i-agency zona umsebenzi wayo xa kufikelela kwezi terms uyintoni?
Okay, the duty of an estate agent, firstly, is to make sure that you understand the terms and conditions. The agent must sit down with you, take you through all the terms of the agreement, make sure you understand. Our code of conduct, the code of conduct for estate agents, requires of estate agents to explain the terms and conditions in the language that the consumer understands. And if the agent is not in a position to do that part, the agent can refer this consumer to a lawyer or someone who will help him understand. And at the same time, one of the things that I want to mention is that I think they can also ask for a copy. Take a copy home, sit down with your children, sit down with your neighbor, anyone who can help you understand exactly what the contract is trying to say.
Before you sign.
Before you sign it. Yeah.
All right. Okwangoku ke makhe sibuyele evenkileni. Please join us after this. Sikwamkele kwakhona mbukeli sisancokola ke ngezinto onokwazi ke kubaleke ukuba uzazi phambi kokuba uthenge indlu. Abaninzi bazifumana bedanile emva kwemincili yokuthenga indlu, abayifumani neengxaki ezidala iindleko. My guests are Pierre Venter from the Banking Association of South Africa, Jimmy Baloyi from the Estate Agency Affairs Board, and attorney Levy. Let me come to you, Jimmy, on the issue of the kind of questions a home buyer should ask an agent.
Okay. Look, it's very important. Well, the first thing that you'd want to know is the asking price. How much is the asking price? And you benchmark that against what you can afford. And whether the price is negotiable. And you know, obviously you'd want to know how long the house has been in the market for. And whether there are any defects. Because remember, if there are any latent defects relating to the property, which information was brought to the attention of the estate agent, it is the duty of the estate agent to disclose all those, every information that was given to him in that capacity must be disclosed. So those are the most important kind of questions that they need to ask. And obviously, you know, they would want to know whether they would be able to afford, you know, the bond, you know, at a later stage. Yeah.
There's one other matter that I'd just like to add.
All right.
And that is the potential arrears in terms of rates and taxes and utilities, the services that a municipality provides. We're finding increasingly that consumers, because they're under financial pressure, get into arrears in terms of their rates and taxes and services that they receive from a municipality. That can either slow the transaction down, it can invalidate the transaction where a bank is not prepared to allow the transfer to be effected because the seller would have to repay that debt, or alternatively, if it goes back a number of years, you could find a buyer sitting with a potential, you know, the arrears accrues against the property as opposed to an individual. So if you effect transfer, a municipality would provide you with a rates clearance certificate where they only have to disclose 2 years of arrears. And you could find as a potential buyer that you're sitting with another big arrears account prior that period. So that's a problematic area, and I would call for copies of that. And if you're buying in a sectional title complex, have a look at the financial fitness of the complex itself, the financials of that complex, and what the levy is going to be, because that's a charge that you incur over and above the normal maintenance of your property and payment of bond.
All right, sinayo uVusi Yena from Mpumalanga. Vusi, wamkelekile enkubeni?
Sawubona.
Hello tata.
Ninjani?
Siyaphila Nkosi kunjani?
Ngiyaphila.
Uthini tata namhlanje?
Mina mangicela ukubuza la.
Tata ndimamele.
Ngathenga indlu la. So ukuthenga kwami.
Tata uVusi, ngicela undicimele iTV yakho undimamele nje apha efonini ke. Uyakwazi ukucimela nje volume yakho?
Okay.
Enkosi kakhulu.
Ngathenga indlu la mama ne. So ekuthengeni kwami indlu ngithenga through abameli. So savumelana nomuntu othengiselana naye saqeda futhi ukuthengiselana, but iproblem enginayo noma ngi-experience la kule stand engisithele kamasipala noma kuleyo ndlu kunendlu engumakhelwane yakhe igarage nangena ngapha esayidini lami. So kamasipala nangabe ngilandelela ngathi ba-awe ngaleyo nto leyo, but angazi iproblem ngathi nangithi ngibatshela ukuthi ngicela ukuthi babuye bangimedele isitandi sami ukuthi siphelelaphi. But ayibona lapho bagcina ukusimeda the first time ngikwakhiwe. So manje ngiyofuna mina ama-surveyors. So ama-surveyors akhuluma ukuthi azongitshaja paying ukumeda kusho ukuthi kuzoba ngi-1,000 rand. So angazi ngingancedakala kanjani mhlawumbe entweni efana naleyo.
Alright ke Vusi, ngicela uwenze ke lento batata uthathe ezinombolo zilapha ku screen ke uzama ufonela kuzo bangakwazi ukunceda, kodwa nathi ke ngexesha sizawuzama ukuphendula umbuzo wakho. Jimmy, ngicela usincede am.
Look, I'm not sure if I understand him correctly, but I think he's referring to a house that he bought, and the neighbor has built a garage over what he believes is his property, and he says the municipality is not able to assist in that regard, especially in the townships. I don't know how that happens, because the first thing before you can erect a structure, the plans need to be approved by the municipality, and obviously they've got the facility to check if the size of the structure that you want to erect won't encroach upon your neighbor's property, for instance, or your neighbor's rights. But I think the caller might want to speak to his lawyer in regard to that, and if obviously cannot afford a lawyer, the Legal Aid South Africa is able to offer free legal assistance.
And then the garage is there now. I mean, what can he do? That's what he's asking. He doesn't know what to do right now.
Well, I think the first thing he should do is establish some documentation supporting his view that his neighbour's garage is built on his property, and then attempt to approach his neighbour to discuss it and say, this is the documentation which supports my view that your garage is on my property. Can we make a plan to resolve this? If the neighbour's not going to come to the party, then I would suggest to the consumer that he do a letter to the neighbour, setting out that he presented him with the documentation. The neighbour still won't listen and still won't assist in reaching a resolution of the matter, and that now the consumer, the gentleman, has to go and see an attorney, and that whatever the attorney charges, he will look to his neighbour to cover. If that still doesn't help, go and see the attorney, let the attorney do a similar letter to the, let's call him the aggressor, and if the aggressor still doesn't cooperate, then the court's assistance must be sought, if necessary an order obtained, that the sheriff of the court, accompanied by the necessary building participants, go and knock down that garage and restore the boundaries to where they should actually be.
So they could do that, knock down that garage?
the court could make such an order, yes.
All right. For now, let's take our final commercial break. Ungayindawo ke mbukeli. Welcome to our last segment where we hope to deal with solutions and tips that will hopefully save you the disappointment when buying a new home. And we continue with our discussion. I'll start off with our Facebook messages. Firstly, we welcome your thoughts, your views on the stories that we bring you on Yilungelo Lakho. Siyazifumana ke messages zenu ezilapha ke ku Facebook. Ephuma ke ku George Matonsi ithi, before I buy a used house, I must take my plumber and electrician to check if the house is in good condition. And that's something that we want to talk about in terms of the required certifications. Ellen, can you touch on that?
Yes, well actually before a property is transferred by an attorney, there need be in the conveyance's file 3 certificates. The first is the electrical compliance certificate, where an electrician certifies that the installation in the house is in good order. The second is a gas certificate. If there's a gas supply to the house, there must also be a certificate by a certified gas inspector certifying the installation is in good condition. And if there is an electrical fence around the property, there's a new regulation that a certified party must also confirm that the electrical fence is in good working order. So the conveyancer transferring the property to the buyer must have all 3 certificates in his file before transfer takes place. In any event, as a precaution, the buyer can also send his own parties, his own electrician, his own plumber, to also assess the property.
All right. Jimmy, ndiyakubona uyavuma wena ufuna uthini ingakumbi kwicala lo inspector indlu examining this house ozoyithenga wena zintoni efuneka uzijongile?
You know, that's very important actually, because the patent defects, the defects that you can see with your naked eye, those are the ones that you need to inspect the house and satisfy yourself that the wall is not cracked, for instance. But like I said earlier on, the latent defects is up to the seller to disclose that. And most importantly, I would like to say that before you can even do anything in regard to buying this property, you need to speak to the estate agents affairs board where estate agents are involved. Check the credentials, make sure that this is the correct person. And one of the problems that we experience the most, people, especially in the townships, people would pay large sums of money towards the property without even inspecting the property first. And more often than not, these are fly-by-night estate agents. Because firstly, people don't, take it upon themselves to find out who's staying in that property, whether that person is the owner and whether he's selling the property. So you find, especially the elderly, someone who has worked for so many years and now they have, they are on pension, they have received that lump sum. Those are the people that are prone to this kind of scams. We have had a situation whereby someone who passed themselves off as an estate agent pointed at a house from a distance to say, if you give me 100,000 rand, that house over there is yours. And this old man lost all the money that he had. And the agent disappeared. All
right, before I go to the caller, Ellen, I'd like us, in fact, I'd like us to look at the issue of misrepresentation, because Jimmy touched on the fact that the latent defects, the seller will have to disclose those. And there are issues where people do not disclose such issues. And what's your recourse in that situation? But I'll come back to you. Now, we do have Lahana, if I've got your name right, from the Free State. Lahana,
hello.
Hello, Dada.
Hello.
Yakuva Tadu Tini?
Yes, man. I've got a complaint against the estate owner who didn't pay my commission. I'm also due for the estate agent.
Ngalupinde kwa kona Tadu Tini?
The problem is owner as estate agent. I want to commission.
All right, you are an agent.
I was an agent. He fired me, but he didn't pay my commission.
All right. Sizawucela uJimmy yena asiphendule kule meko yakho, but please do check the number. We do have the board's number. You can call them and see if they can help you. Thank you very much for your call. Briefly, Jimmy, I don't know what you can say to him about his problem.
What I want to say briefly is that if he is a registered estate agent and the principal did not pay commission, obviously that's something. Remember, the Estate Agency Affairs Board's mandate is regulated by the Act. So in terms of the Act and the regulations, the board does not have jurisdiction, does not have the authority to entertain inter-agent disputes. But if he has earned his money and he's duly registered, he's free to approach a court of law and get them to rule in as far as.
All right, kodwa ngakwazi ukuthetha nani nimcacisele uba angenza ntoni na. All right, Ellen, my question was on the latent defects, if there's an issue of misrepresentation and non-disclosure.
All right, that's a very good question. We touched earlier on the offer to purchase. One of the very important clauses in there as well is a Roman Dutch term called voetstuts. That term means that the buyer, the consumer, is buying the property in the condition that it is. And any problem with the property, when the buyer signs the offer, he is exempting the seller from liability for that problem. That's the voetstuts clause. The voetstuts clause covers the seller substantially, but not for everything. Jimmy was touching on two legal terms. One is patent defects and one is latent defects. Patent defects are defects that any person walking into the property can see. It's a crack in the wall, it's a leaking tap. The voetstuts clause does cover that. The seller cannot, the buyer cannot turn around.
Okay, it's time for us to wrap, so briefly.
Yes, the buyer cannot turn around later and say, fix that, he's seen it already.
All right.
It's the latent defects, the hidden defects that the buyer has got recourse against the seller when he discovers it later.
All right, Pierre, very briefly, just on the borrowing education for home buyers, especially those first-time home buyers, very briefly.
Critically important matter. It's very underestimated. All the banks offer it. I would suggest to all first-time home buyers that they make sure that they attend that course. It does allow them to make an informed decision, which is something we've been hopping on for the last hour.
And we should have your numbers. Thank you very much. Well, we have now come to the end of today's show. I'd like to thank my guests for their time and knowledge. Please join us again next Friday for another consumer topic of the week. Please tune into the same channel every Monday morning from 9:30 to 10:30. From me, Sisanda Jonas, and the entire team, it's goodbye. Yilungelo Lakho.